Hey, what's up coders, welcome back to my channel. Well, today's video is a continuation of my Firestore with Flutter video in which we had seen how to set up a project on Firebase, and also we had seen how to retrieve data from Firestore. So we had followed a simple post example in it. Well, in today's video we will see how to perform the Firestore CRUD operation, and I will exclusively focus on the adding part of the data, which would be like adding the data onto your Firestore. I would highly suggest you to please watch the Firestore with Flutter video before proceeding to this video, so that you have a basic understanding of how to set up a project and how to work with stream builders. And I'll add a link in the description for more details. Alright, to demonstrate the CRUD operation, I have picked up this simple to-do task app in which you will see a list of tasks displayed with the task type icons on the left corner and the time and date details on the right corner. And there you have a floating button. When clicked, it routes you to a new page where you can literally add a new task and with the details. And when you submit it, you are given a confirmation that the task is added, and then you would find a new task on this to-do task screen. I will first show you the demonstration, and I'll also show you that in this video I will be using two approaches to add the data to the Firestore. Alright, so moving on to the demonstration. So as I discussed, this is a simple to-do task. So I'm going to click on this floating button icon so that it would route to a new page. And I'm just going to add a new task, say, and then I'm going to select the tasks type. So here it's going to be a travel. And then I'm going to click on submit. So when I do that, you can see that it gets added here. And depending on my type, the icon changes. So if I choose party, I would get a purple icon, and if I choose gym, I would get this. If I choose shopping, and then this is like others. So this is a very simple to-do task, and as I mentioned, I'm going to show you two approaches. So one is a very simple one, and another one is using transaction. So first I'll show you the UI part of creating this task and to create this new task list, and then we will implement both the solution. And I forgot to show you that how the detail look when you add the details. So I had recently updated the new to-do task, and you can see that it gets updated here also. So now we will see how to create the first solution of adding data onto your Firestore. So now I'm going to show you the first approach is I'm going to open a particular screen with just one button saying add a task. And when you click on that particular icon, you would be routed to this screen where you can literally add a task. And when you click on submit, you can see it on the Firestore that it's getting updated. So that's the first solution. So for this, what I'm doing is I'm just using two classes. The first one is a stateful widget where I do not have anything fancy. All I have is one customized gradient app bar. So if you have seen my gradient app bar tutorials, you would find the details how to create them. I'll add a link in the description. So that's about it. So if you don't want this gradient, you can just go ahead with a normal app bar. After that, I have created a center, just a text saying to do task, and then a floating button. So this is the button that when I click on it, displays the new task page. So here what I've done is I have used on pressed, and I say that when I click on this button, which is by using the navigator. So when I click on this button, I should be routed to the new task page, which is the full screen dialog true. That's a simple action to be performed when you click on the button. So the form, the submitting of the task onto Firestore, all is available in this file, which I'll be showing you in a minute. So that's about the main file. So moving on to this file. If you look at this, this is also a new task, which is like a stateful widget. Now this page is the one that's responsible for creating this section. So let's see how to create all these details. Okay. So before we start, we know that we need a couple of details. So we are going to use the getter function here, the task, detail, date, time, and the task type. So we need 5 details, 2 buttons. So before that, let's create all these setter values. So the first thing I need is a string. And then next I'm going to define the getter functions for all these 4 details. I'm not using the type here because type is going to be entirely different, where I'm using a int value and using a switch to assign values to them. So I'll show that also in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my radio button values and see if it is of a travel type, then assign a particular value. What I'm doing is I'm initially assigning int underscore my task type 0. And then I'm also going to assign another one called task val. And this is the function that I'm calling when I check the radio buttons. So it's called handle task type, and it takes the corresponding value of the radio button that you have checked. Then I'm using a set state saying in my set state I'm going to make sure that my task type has this particular value. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a switch. So inside the switch I'm going to pass my task type and I'm going to say case 1, which is if the task type if my task type is 1, then I'm going to say assign my task value as travel. Now in a second I'm going to tell you why am I using these values. Alright, if you see the backend, you can see that the task type has some kind of a string value to differentiate. So similar way, you can see for every type there is a text assigned to it. So that's the reason I'm using these value. So similar way I'm going to assign the other cases also. Alright, so now we have defined this handle task type, which is the function that is used when you click on the radio button so that it gets tracked and assigns a particular value. That is, the value is nothing but the task type to identify that. And then we have these getter methods. So now we have this part. Now what we're going to do is now we are going to generate this form. So we'll build this part. It's a simple form with the text fields. So I'll build each of them and then we can see what it exactly depicts in our UI. So first I'm going to start with the body part and I'm going to start with the column widget. As you can see, every detail is just one below the other. Alright, so first I'm going to use my custom app bar, which is the my app bar, which I've already defined. And then I'm going to use a container. And inside my container, first I'm going to give a width and height. So the width will not be a problem. It's going to be a media query. But height, you have to define the media query minus your app bar size, since we are using a custom app bar. So if you look at the app bar, it has a height of 80. So I have to minus that particular height in order to display the content after the app bar. So all I have to do is use the media query section dot height minus 80. So that's the only change that we do here. Then next what I'm doing is I'm using a list view. Why am I using a list view is this is one of the hack to overcome the keyboard issue. That is, whenever you have this and when you click on it and you have your soft keyboard popping up, then what happens is sometimes you get that yellow stripes saying it's been overflowed by so many pixels. So in order to overcome this, I found that the list view is a best way to work on it. and then we're going to use a children array. Alright, so here comes our first child, which is the text field. So let's add the text field. Now inside the text field I have few properties. So first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a onChanged. So onChanged, I'm going to use the get task name. So what happens is on change, whatever details I enter in this particular field gets updated in my get task name. So I'm able to capture those details here. So this way I'm gonna add my rest of my text fields, and then when I come to the radio button section, I'll explain those sections in detail. So I've added the first text field. So similarly, I'm going to add the second text field here. It's going to be the same. The only difference would be the getter and the text decoration, that is the label text. Alright, so now I'm adding a sized, this is just to give that extra spacing after your text fields. And then now we will start with the radio button, which is the select task type with all these radio details. So for that, first I'm going to add a title to it, which is nothing but a text. So there you go. So you can see that it says select a task type. And now we are going to add the radio details, which is nothing but a column widget, because you could see all of the task types are one below the other. I'm going to add a property of the column widget, which is the main axis alignment, and assign it to a center. And inside this I have the individual radio buttons, and I'm going to use a row. The reason is I have the radio button and the text next to each other. So if you look at the form here, you have the radio button and a travel detail. So these two are two separate entities. So in order to get them next to each other, I'm just going to use a row widget. Alright, so what I've done is I've created my first radio button and I've given a value 1. So every radio button will have a value. So the second radio button will have 2. Then next I have something called group value. Group value is, say for example, if you have a collection of radio items, say first one is select task type, next one would be select subtask type. So these are kind of a group radio buttons. So this group has some value. So for that I have given it as my task type, which is initially just 0. And then on changed, that is when my radio button is being changed, I'm calling this function so that it has that hint value, which is the value that particular radio button has, and that's been passed. So that's what I've done here. So I'm gonna create my other radio buttons just exactly similar to this. The only difference will be the value and this text. The rest all remains the same. Alright, so we are done with our radio buttons. Now it's time to add the two buttons, which is either submit or cancel. So let's quickly add that, which is nothing but a row of raised buttons. So let me quickly add those details and get back to you. So here I'm going to add my row of raised button. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a cancel button here. When clicked, it just pops up the particular dialog, in our use case, and another one is on submit. I'm saying call a particular function, which is nothing but creating the data. So this is the function that is actually responsible to add your data to your Firestore. So let's see the implementation part of this. So we had created the task type, the getter values. So let's create a function called create data here. So I'm going to say ds, and this is going to be your Firestore instance dot collection, and the name of the collection would be your collection name, which you can find it over here. We need to add that. I'm going to say document, and since in my other examples I had auto generated this, in this what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the name as of my task name itself. So I'm going to say task name. We already have this detail from the form that we are filling up. So first we have the reference. Then next we are going to use a map. Firestore, most of them are in the form of maps. So I'm going to say map, and then I'm going to give a name to it called tasks. Here what I'm going to do is assign my details that I've got from my form to the Firestore. So here what are the properties we have? If you look at the Firestore here, it's called task name, task type. So I'm going to use these labels and add the values in that particular property. So first one is task name. I'm going to use the same name, and the data to this particular task name is nothing but data that is being entered on the field, text field. It gets updated here. So this is the one that I'm assigning it to my Firestore property. So similar way I'm going to add the other properties here. So for task type, I do not have any getter method, but instead I have the values in the switch case. So this is the value that needs to be updated. So we're going to say task value, and then we're going to say task, adding all the details, and now we have to set it. So in order to set it, we are going to use the document reference, and then we are going to use a method called set data. And what this has to do is it's going to take your task, which was the map value, and then it says when complete. So this part you could do anything. You could have a kind of a pop-up. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, so when I click on submit, you would find a new row updated in your Firestore, and you would find this print task created. So I'll quickly build this and I'll show you how it looks. Alright, so I have built this. I have made this front screen very simple to show you the first approach. So I'm going to click on the floating button. I get a new task window. If you look at the database, you can see that it gets updated here. So this is one first approach of adding your data onto your database by just using the simple create task, where you could see here. Well, let me show you that by just clicking on the button, you are getting all your form fields and then just updating it using the document reference and set data. So this is a very simple approach in case if you just want to update a particular bookmark using an application to get the like count or a vote count or something like that, then you can use this. But as and when your app gets complex, this is not a nice approach. So the second approach that we're going to see is by using the transaction. So let me clear up the template and show you how the second approach works. So I'm using a similar approach where you can see the to-do task, and when you click on the floating button, you are routed to the new task. So the UI remains the same. So only the change part from your first approach compared to this approach is how you are storing the data and retrieving the data back from the Firestore. That is the only major change in the UI part. The rest all remains the same. So I'm not going to redo the UI again. So I'll show you the change parts as and when I implement it. So here what I've done is I have created this as the main screen, and this as the new task or the task screen, and I have created a model class which is called task.dart, which I'll show you all the details. and then I've created a new Firestore service file where all your Firestore transactions happen. Okay, so first let's create the task dot which will have all your task parameters with the Alright, next I'm adding the constructor here. And then after the constructor, we are going to add a few methods like from map to map. The reason we are doing this is the data that we receive from the Firestore has to be deserialized. So for that, we are using these methods, and we are going to add those task property values to it. And here we are going to add the getter methods. And this is where we're going to write our to map and from map methods so that you can deserialize the data that you receive from the Firestore. Alright, so now we have completed our model part where we have created the to map and the from map part. Now we'll move on to our Firestore file where we will create the collection reference and create the transaction handler. Regarding the Firestore, I found an article, so I'm going to leave a link in the description with more details about it. So he has explained it, so you can definitely follow this. Create our collection reference, which is nothing but the Firestore instance collection, and the path to my collection is my to-do list, which is the name of the collection on the Firestore. Then next we have the class, and that's called Firestore services, and the type is the task that I've created, and I'm going to create a method called to do task. So whenever I enter all the fields detail in my form and click on the submit button, this is the function that gets triggered. So this is going to take all your form details, which is your task name, and then first thing we're going to create our transactional handler. Then I'm going to create a document snapshot. It awaits for your transaction to get that particular document by using my collection.document reference. So once I have these details, I'm going to create an instance of my task and pass in all the details that I receive from my form. And then I'm going to use my map function so that I could actually use to map and send it back to my Firestore. And this data is nothing but my task. Since I have all my task details here, all I have to do is just say to map. So that was the reason that we created those methods in our task model file. And then we're going to say await transaction set. Now we are going to set our document snapshot with the reference, and this is being assigned with data. Data is the one that has all our map details, and then I'm going to say return data. So this is your first part of it. Now the second part is to run your transaction. So for that, what we have to do is we have to say return. So here we are going to say return Firestore instance run transaction, and then we're going to say create transaction. So this is the one we are creating the transaction. Inside this, we're going to say once this is done, return task from map. If not, we're going to say catch error. So we are saying run the transaction and then return the task from map, and we are mapping the data. If not, we're going to say catch error, and then in the catch error we are going to just say return null and print the error. Alright, so here we have done the transaction that is related to adding the details onto the Firestore. Now we will deal with another method called get task list, that is basically used to retrieve the details from your Firestore so that it can display it on your main screen, as in when there is a new task added, you would get it displayed here. So that for that we have an extra function. So let's call that function also. We are using a stream query snapshot, and I'm gonna define two parameters in it, and one is called init offset and another one is limit. Then we are going to get the reference of our collection in this particular snapshot. So we're going to say we're going to get the stream. This is nothing but, and then we will assign this to my collection dot snapshots. So this gives you the reference of your collection and the document. Then we're going to check if my offset is null or if my limit is null. So depending on that, it retrieves your snapshot details. So first we'll check the offset and then we will check the. This is your service part where you are retrieving the details and adding the details. So now let's move on to our task screen. That is when I click on my submit button, which function is created, and in the main screen, how to retrieve it. Alright, this is the task screen. The task screen is nothing but the screen that actually has all your text fields. Now here in my previous sample I had shown you that on change we used a getter method and we were able to retrieve the form fields, but here we are using controllers. So controllers, and we are saying task name controller, so that way we have the details of the text field. So everywhere I'm using a controller. That's the first change. Next, what I'm doing is on submit. So if you see here, the group value on changed, everything remains the same. So the only difference is on when you click on the submit button, what I'm doing is I'm using a Firestore reference and I'm saying create to do task. Now if you look at this create to do task, that is what we created here. It creates the transaction handler and passes your map details to your Firestore, which we just did a couple of minutes ago. So there we are passing our text, the controller, and then we say navigator pop context so that it closes that particular dialog. Now here there is one more change, that is in your init state you have to define your task controllers. When I say task name controller, you are saying it's an editing text controller and the value is nothing but the widget task name. That way you will be able to capture the each individual text field values. So this is about controllers. Now once you're done with it, you would be able to submit your detail onto your Firestore. Next, we need to retrieve it. Retrieving part, which I've already done in my previous video where I'd used a stream builder. Now similar kind of approach I've used in my this section also, so I'll show you how it is done. Now moving on to your main screen. The main screen is the screen where you can display all your task details. Now as I mentioned, I'm using a list view with a material widget, and I'll show you how to get these icons depending on your task type, and then I'll show you how to get these details from your walkthrough of how to get these details from your Firestore. So the first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a task, a list with a type task, and then I'm going to use my Firestore services so that I get a reference of my Fire services, and then the query snapshot called to do task. So first thing what we're going to do is in our init state we are going to assign the item to the new list. This is for retrieving the data from the Firestore. Then I'm going to say that if my to-do task, I check if my to-do task, it keeps listening for those snapshots. As and when you add something, it keeps listening for it, and when you find something, it gets those details. So I'm going to say to-do tasks equals to fire service. This is the reference that I have to my Firestore service.file. So I'm going to say fire service dot get task. So we had created this method in our, it actually gets those snapshot details from your Firestore. So I'm going to say get task list. I'm going to assign my values that I'm retrieving from my Firestore, and I'm assigning it into a task list. And then I'm passing the task from map. So you remember we had that, so we are using the from map to deserialize the data from the Firestore. So the data that is passed is here would be document snapshot.data. Alright, so once this conversion has happened, then we use our set state and we assign those tasks to our items. Now item is the one that actually is a list which contains all our task details. Now we have to just get these items and pass it on to our list view builder so that it gets updated in those particular list item placeholders. So here what I've done is I have used my app bar, the similar UI, and I've used a list view builder, and then I'm passing that item, the item that I get from my Firestore. So the item, the length, and the item builder. So if you have seen already my stream builder, it's the similar approach that I've used here. So, and then I'm using the item. So wherever I need to get my task value, all I do is item, index, and the task type. So it automatically picks it up. So here I have my task name, and then here I have my task data, date, and my time. So it's something very similar to my previous video that I did with my stream builders to get the data from the Firestore. If you watch it, it would be exactly the same way. It's just that the UI is different. Now moving on to this particular UI section where the icon changes depending on your task type. So what I'm doing is first grabbing the task value. So I get it from my Firestore in this particular variable, and I'm using a to-do type. So when I click on this, what I'm doing is I'm getting the icon type value. I check using a switch statement that whether if this icon type is travel, shopping, gym, or party. Depending on that, what I do is I change my icon value and the color value. That is what all I'm doing on this particular function, which is the to-do type widget. So that is the only difference. And then I say return, create that background color value which I'm defining, and then a icon value which is what I'm defining here. So depending on your switch case value. So this is what it looks like. So I'm gonna give a quick build and show you how it looks. So there you go, I have built this. So I'm clicking on the floating button and I'm taken to this new task. And as usual, I'm just gonna add and then I'm gonna select the type and I'm gonna say party and then submit. When I do that, you can see that the dialog disappeared, and then you can see a sample. The moment I chose party, I get this icon, and you can see how instantly I get it here. And at the same time, when I check the database, you can see the data gets updated here as well, the sample and sample to do task. So here the UI could be anything. The only thing that you need to focus is your Firestore service, where you're using your transaction handler to update your Firestore and retrieve the data using this, and your task, the model class, how are you creating this. So this is the only difference. The rest all remain simple, and use a stream builder or a list view builder to get the details, or it could be just a single value also. So I have shown you two approaches in this video. The first one was just a simple add approach. The second one was using a transaction handler. So hope you liked the video. If you do like it, please give it a like and subscribe. And if you find this informative, please do share it. Thank you.